I know how to offend people. Having things is attractive to us, but not building things. People want the formula novel if the formula novel sold 50,000 copies the last time. They read my book and then doesn't hit me, I say thank you. You don't give a shit about the reader, then keep it in a drawer and call it a diary. Want to see the world as it exists in our head rather than it actually is. It is about networks. It's about who you know and how people can sell you. When I see second-rate critics advancing second-rate work so that when their own novel comes out later on, it can appear to be first-rate. You are not part of the club because no one is part of the club. The club does not exist. It is your unique point of view that is the only thing, that makes you of value in this world. Yes. Come back to me, I don't know, a little further into the drink.
Dale Peck is an author, former mentor, and instructor of mine from New York. I asked him to do an episode of this series with me. How novelists interact with the notion of fame is especially interesting in a period that many would consider the death of the novel. Dale's a fascinating man, and his reputation in the New York literary circles certainly precedes him. He has been a novelist and literary critic for more than 3 decades. His books have been celebrated, even as he himself has been called a controversial figure. Dale believes most critically acclaimed books are terrible, that most of the canon is disposable, and that most writers are victims of their own egos, affectedness, and complacencies. He has never been shy about discussing these and other subjects he deems critical. In this conversation, he defends the beliefs that what most people call originality is simply recontextualizing well-known truths in new packages, that art and commerce are fundamentally opposed, and that the publishing world is a modernized, bureaucratized industry that is, quote, about who you know and how people can sell you. If you look for it in a few places, I think you'll see in Dale's ideas hints of optimism about what literature means to the world and why writers still matter greatly. I like Dale, and he's always been a good friend to me, and I was grateful for his time. This, like a few other conversations in this series, was filmed before COVID, but most of what we are talking about bears little relationship to time. What do you consider yourself foremost?
So is this whole thing predicated on the fact that I'm not famous?
Well, I have not decided how I'm entitling you. Some are. Why aren't you, parentheses, more famous? Yeah, and in your case, we might have to use parentheses.
Why aren't I rich? Why does no one like me in the publishing industry? These are all answers to the question, why am I not famous? Fame is a weird thing, with any kind of artistic pursuit, because, on the one hand, the work is only the work, regardless of the acclaim. But then on the other hand, art only has meaning when it's actually, in front of people's faces. So obviously, the more people's faces that it's in front of, the more chances that it has to sort of, grow and become part of the cultural conversation and everything else. It's not quite the same thing as celebrity, right? Literary fame. I guess, there are versions of it, although those seem to be like a little distilled, through history, whatever Norman Mailer getting in fistfights and stuff like that.
Art only has meaning in front of a certain number of eyeballs.
Well, on a certain on one literal level, yes. I mean, if nobody ever reads a book, then the book has literally no meaning. It is, God knows, like the greatest books might have ever been written and have been completely lost and we've never read. They don't have any, meaning to us whatsoever. When one person reads a book, there's a private experience of the book. When 2 people read the book and they talk about it, then it becomes a shared experience. When, an entire, city or country reads a book and they talk about it, through the various ways that people talk about it, through reviews and blogs and social media and this and that and the other thing, then that much more sort of meaning is attached to the book. It's not like there's like a single, hermetic meaning that's locked inside the text and like everyone interacts with exactly the same thing. It's like, when I pick up such and such a book and, like I know that, my best friend Lisa really loved this book, I'm going to be predisposed to like it, but I'm also going to like look for things that I know that she likes, in a book and like pick up on that and think, oh, it didn't really work for me, but I get why Lisa liked it. It's like, even if you're taking, like a William Carlos Williams poem with 6 words, if it has 1 million readers, it will have 1 million different meanings, to each of them, and if they share their meanings, then the differences are often, as interesting to people as the overlaps are. So,
but there's a lot of chaff, right?
It's there could be completely wrong-headed readings, and in terms of like the author's intention and even what's in the text and stuff. But I think if you're making art and you're putting it out there in the world, then you have to accept that people are coming to it with a certain set of experiences, and all that. And if I'm writing a book, whatever, The Law of Enclosure is about a heterosexual, white couple from working class, Long Island, and somebody from Kenya picks it up, and they're like, I really don't give a shit about these people's problems. It's like they got plenty of food to eat. Like, why are they so upset?
Well, that's fine, but that's not that's not an objective thing. That may be disinterest. I'm not faulting disinterest.
Yeah, but there's no objectivity when you're talking about art.
Subjective.
Yeah, it's all subjective, and you can make better and worse cases for things, but ultimately it's just kind of like, if I'm a person, whatever, who's been sexually assaulted at age 4 by an uncle, and I pick up a book, in which there are lots of jokes about kind of like, incest and child rape and stuff like that, I might want to burn the book. Whereas if I'm a person who's not particularly sensitive to that, I might think it's really funny and understand that it's ironic. It's always subjective. You just have to, trust that.
That person's pain can be completely valid.
Mm-hmm.
And something to be empathetic about, but that's got nothing to do with the stable nature of the story, whether the story is meant to be read as ironic or meant to be read as a pain point. Yeah,
but you have to realize as a writer that you can't control that.
Fair enough.
It's
there is an objectivity, is my point.
I think that like maybe there's a certain amount of consensus, but it gets really gray really fast.
Mm-hmm. What makes a writer successful?
What makes a writer successful, he said. Talking about success in terms of acclaim and money, no, there's no guarantee whatsoever.
Sure.
If you're talking about success in terms of, recognizing, what your capabilities are and then performing to the best of them, then yes. It's like, I could train and run a 10K and all that. I would come in dead last, but as long as I went into that knowing that like finishing it was a strong accomplishment for me, then yes, I would feel like I had produced good results. Those would be my skills. So you can hone your craft as a writer your entire life and be diligent, recognize what your strengths are and stuff, and over time you should get better. But then at a certain point, and this is one of those things that turning 50 like makes you more conscious of. The mind grows less elastic and all that. Grooves develop, and it's very easy, to write habitually rather than to write, sort of what you actually mean to say. I think actually, kind of tangentially, why am I not famous, or what are the, what is the experience of not being famous like? One of the nice things about never having made it, and just be able to like, sit down and whatever, write one book every 7 years and masturbate a lot, is that like I've always, like had to think on some level, is anyone going to read this book? Is any publisher going to publish this book? And all that, and it's not so much a case of, trying to think of, what is the commercial formula or something like that, but just recognizing that nobody's going to write me a check for $250,000, for something I spit on the page, and all that. So I think it's kept me a little bit on my toes, because I've definitely, I've easily seen myself be 30, 40 pages into a project and realize it's just kind of like, I could write this in my sleep, and I probably am writing this in my sleep, and I need to throw it out and start over.
So the pressure being kept on, the fact that the pressure was always on, forced you to dig deeper.
Yeah. Oh, I mean, I never take anything for granted. I never like for me, anytime a single person comes up to me and says that that they read my book and then doesn't hit me, I say thank you. It's I don't take any reader for granted. And I and when I'm working on the book, I'm conscious of that. I probably said in your class, I don't know, but it's like if you don't give a shit about the reader, then keep it in a drawer and call it a diary. If you actually think that if you want to put something in front of other people's eyes, then you have to think about the other person and what they're interested in, and that's not the same thing as pandering to them. But it's like
you can name probably know a few people who maybe hit a certain level and then kind of checked out on the importance of that.
Yes. Yeah. Come back to me. I don't know, a little further into the drink. Maybe we'll say something. I mean, it's hard not to. Yeah. I mean, people.
It's hard to do it in the first place.
It's hard to do it in the first place, and anyone who is successful, will have smoke blown up their ass constantly. So, you think that you're doing everything well. People want the formula novel if the formula novel sold 50,000 copies the last time around. So, it's hard to resist, But then there are some people, all right, I don't care if I offend Jeanette Winterson. Like, Jeanette Winterson writes for sycophants,
In addition to the canon, I'd like to apologize.
I'm not apologizing to Jeanette Winterson. She is a very, very good writer who fucking gave up a long time ago. May I curse? Yeah. You ever watch Gilmore Girls? We had this conversation. Gilmore Girls, a great television show everyone should continue to watch. Not so much the reunion, but Norman Mailer has a cameo. It's a 1 or 2 episode arc that he's actually in.
He's alive
when
they made that show.
Yeah. So they open an inn in Connecticut, and I guess Mailer had a house in Connecticut. And they're struggling to make money, and they have a restaurant, and he comes in for like a week, and someone's interviewing him like this, and all he drinks is iced tea. And at one point, Melissa McCarthy, who plays the chef, she walks up there, she's like, "Hey, Norman Mailer, how you doing? Are you hungry? I can make you something." She's like, "It's stump the chef," and he's just like, and he's not bad acting.
Really?
Like he's just kind of like, "Are you crazy?"
Yeah.
And she's like, "I've got better things to do than just make you iced tea." And then they kick him out, and then there's another restaurant famously in the show, and Lorelai, who's the main character, comes in, and she's, "Hey, Luke, how you doing?" And he's like, "All right, I got this cracker over here. Is only offer, only drinking iced tea," and it's Norman Mailer again. Give him props for that. But he does say in like this, it's like amazing. He like the interview is like, "How good are you?" And he's like, that's the question I don't answer. It's like I'm either the best or the worst. He said there are about 20 writers in America, who all think they're the best living American writer, and obviously I'm one of them, and all that. But somebody else will decide that. It's me. I'm the best writer. Like I wonder if he had approval over that, or like Amy Sherman Palladino's pretty clever. I bet she knew exactly the kind of ego boost to write for him.
Did you see the YouTube clip of him and Rip Torn just beating the shit out of each other?
Physically hitting each other? I've heard of this, actually.
He runs out there filming some indie thing. Rip Torn comes at him with a hammer. And he cracks him on the back of the head.
I have no doubt that Norman Mailer deserved it.
Well, no, because Torn said the movie needed it.
Yeah, I tried to read advertisements for myself like a few years ago. I was sitting in a used bookstore, and then I saw it on the shelf, and oh my God. I mean, it is just, he's a genius writer. I've never really liked many of his books except for The Executioner Song, which I really, really love.
American Dream.
But I haven't tried it.
Spooky Art, the writing book.
Okay, I've only tried to read
all right, I'm just saying,
a few of them.
In addition to the Kenyans and Miss Winters.
Hey, I think he agrees that The Executioner Song is his masterpiece, and I also agree. It's a great book. I taught that book. And,
Did you really?
For that, I should get a fucking medal. It's a long-ass book.
Yeah.
It's a long book to teach.
Fitzgerald said there can be no accurate biography of a writer because a writer, if he's any good, is too many people at once. And he said also,
didn't he end up in a mental institution, or just the wife?
He? I mean, he stuck her in there.
But I mean, he was not so stable himself, right?
He was an alcoholic.
Yeah.
He died at 45 of a heart attack, shacked up with that gossip columnist, I think.
Yeah, I mean, so
But let's not.
I get that. See, I'm one of those persons. I think that all of my characters are me. Like I don't think that I'm all of my characters. I look at them and they're all exactly the same on some level to me, and they're all me. And I hope that they don't actually read that way.
They evolve in the story, right? They might start out as you.
I think they're all me. It's just kind of like me, sort of, exploring little fantasied versions, of power or weakness, or
Did you ever read the Graham Greene autobiography?
No, I've never read his autobiography.
He says
What's it called?
Sort of Life, I think it's called. No, it's not. It's called Ways of Escape. He wrote another book called Sort of Life. It's called Ways of Escape, and he says that his cab driver once in, I don't remember where it was, and the cab driver was driving around, and he's telling him about a man that he saw fished out of the river, and the body was not recognizable because there were so many leeches all over it. And Greene said it's the only image that he's ever heard that he could liken to the writer, because there were so many stillborn creations and so many actual creations that had poisoned the visage of whatever, the external of a person.
I guess I don't think of it that way.
Yeah.
I find writing very hard, but in a very pleasurable way. And and there are times, definitely, that I have to take myself to places I don't want to go. Often, I mean, I especially did that early on. I mean, when I was young, it was almost, I think it was a lot more masochistic in a way. And I was also, I think maybe I was more sadistic. I really wanted to put ugly things in front of people's faces, as well. So, but I always found it very satisfying, and I also found it very purging. Like I've become very leery of writing autobiography, just because I find that when I do actually write it down, I forget it. And like years later, I'll pick up a book or an essay or something, and I will like, oh right, that happened to me. Like writing it tends to make it go away.
But Cheryl thing. So you have to. He's giving advice to his daughter. You have to feel it so desperately that thing you have to say, in the way of saying it, blend as one matter, as indissolubly as if they were conceived together. The thing you have to say in the way of saying it. So I want to ask you, where does your style grow from? You're a critic, an intellectual, but also a lyrical, visual, tactile storyteller. Which of these things is you, and which takes more effort?
It's that's almost another aspect of what we were talking about before, about just like avoiding your own ruts. I mean, it's just like so inescapable. Like, I definitely feel like I am one of those writers that, if like they ran me, an anonymous piece of writing by me through one of those computer programs that analyzes language, they could figure out it was me in like 5 seconds. Like I have my tics and everything else. I think a lot of it has to do with when I came of age and what I was interested in. I was reading a lot of new narrative writing in the 1980s. Very terse, but very smooth, very filled with graphic imagery, but also sort of, looking for certain kinds of, transcendental or liminal experiences, usually through mortification of the body. My 2 first real breakthroughs, not as a writer, but as a reader, before I had any breakthroughs as a writer. The first was Hemingway's short story Hills Like White Elephants, and all that, which I read and I didn't get, and I went in to argue with my teacher, for like an hour and a half, and then suddenly I realized that it was a pretty good story.
How old were you?
I was, I think, a freshman in college, second semester freshman year of college, and then Ford Madox Ford's The Good Soldier, which as a piece of prose couldn't be any different. Just kind of like reading it on an airplane and just being utterly sort of transfixed by that. At any given moment, the culture is asking itself certain questions, examining certain issues and things like that, and I try to pay attention to those sorts of things. And I think that once you're kind of like settled into your style, your voice, and all that, it should actually prove to be fairly elastic. You should be able to adapt it to certain things. Although, as I say this, I'm thinking now, as I was writing my second book, well, it was kind of even as I was finishing my first book and writing my second book, I mean, my first book especially is very terse. It's a very kind of, young writer who read Hemingway and was influenced by him kind of thing. And I began to realize that there were certain things that I could not say with that style, and particularly, intellectual things. It is a very anti-intellectual style.
Okay. Every fiction is always opposed to some truth. Mm-hmm. And the opposition in these stories was easy to spot. For they were about a happy mother, happy father, happy John. Any reflections on that all these years later?
When I wrote my first novel, I was at that age where I would every idea I had was precious to me, and I would just stop whatever I was doing and jot it down. There's the opening of one of the stories in Martin and John. I actually wrote on a street corner. I wrote on 23rd and 8th Avenue because I just had the idea, and at 23 years old, I just sat my ass down on a street corner and just wrote a page and a half.
Why are you saying it like it's not romantic
and all that?
And inspirational. Why are you saying it?
It's romantic and inspirational, and also totally full of oneself.
Well, yeah, but where else does it come from? I mean, the Emerson line about someone grabs you and you miss a word wrong, you're not gonna get it right.
It's or whatchamacallit, Truman Capote. It's hitting already,
it's not
maybe.
Capote?
Yeah, Truman Peyote. Truman Capote, like once was like said something like, "Do I think that critics and publishers. No. What he said, do I think that young writers are too full of themselves? He's like, I think they can't be, too full of themselves, because if they don't love themselves, no one else will. The other quote I was confusing was Flannery O'Connor's famous quote about, do I think that, critics and publishers stifle too many young writers? In my opinion, they don't stifle enough of them. No, you have to love yourself, because it is just pure hubris. And you have to kind of push through the hubris eventually to say something meaningful. But that is the start of it. It is deep self-involvement. But so anyway, there were all these scraps of papers and everywhere, and at some point I wrote down every fiction is opposed to some truth. I think maybe the original line was some fact, but some truth is what ended up in the book. But what happened was, I had written. We had a galley of the book, and then my editor like asked me to help him with the jacket copy, and I wrote a version of the jacket copy that included that line, "Every fiction is opposed to some truth," as quotation from the book. And when I got the second to last galley, of the book, I realized I had not yet put that in there, and so I wrote that sentence, literally just scrawled it in, like the whole thing at the last minute.
But I would argue that it was more meaningful than
No, it was like, I mean, I thought it's meaningful enough that I thought that like it explained the book, and so I put it in the damn jacket copy.
Unconscious processes forced you to get at it. It wasn't something that was the result of syllogisms on the page. It came to you. So you don't do that anymore. You're on a street corner and something strikes you. You're like, nah, that's not the one.
I used to build like my novels out of these little fragments. I would just have slips and slips of paper. I used to have this folder. I called it Stuff, and it had lots of little slips of paper from everywhere, napkins, this and that, and note cards and stuff. Now I don't. Now the sentences. I try not to write standalone sentences, as it were. Now the sentences are deeply enmeshed. And it's always surprising. When you read reviews and someone quotes a line, and I'm like, oh, that line's very quotable, and like I wouldn't usually don't notice it when I'm writing the book, and the ones I think they'll quote, they never quote it.
You're a proponent of candor. What place we might have gotten to this already? What place does candor hold today? In what place should it be holding?
Did you read that article by Christian Lorenzen in the Current Book Forum? God, I'm just ruining it. It's I would like to work with Christian Lorenzen one day, but it's a shitty article. It's so shitty that I don't remember if he was arguing that writers today are too confessional because they're really concealing everything, or if writers are pretending to conceal everything, but they're really spilling the beans all the time. Like it was, yeah, it just didn't work. But I don't think it's something that you can make a universal principle out of. I think that I have a tendency, to sort of like just say something blunt about myself, or reveal something about myself that might make other people uncomfortable, just because not revealing it often makes me uncomfortable.
You have an eloquent point about the history of honorable, candid hatchet jobs, right? Mm-hmm. So why is that important to you, and how important is it to us, and how come we don't know?
I mean, if you're talking specifically in the case of literary criticism and that kind of candor, because most books that are acclaimed are very terrible. They're really terrible, or they are merely okay and they are praised way beyond their means, which makes them terrible in comparison to the things that are said about them. Because especially nowadays, I mean, to some degree this has always been true, but I think it's very true in the second half of the 20th century when an industry like publishing becomes so very industrialized and bureaucratized. It is about networks. It's not about what you do. There are endless choices. Of people who can sort of like fill your niche, and then it's about who you know and how people can sell you and all that. And like you can just whatever. Look at any particular prize committee or list of prize recipients, and you'll see a group of very good networkers. That does not mean that they are also bad writers, or that they are also bad writers.
We're going to pull Instagram quotes for this, and You're missing pearls here.
But very often, they are.
Yeah. And you think that someone needs to point that out?
I think that among other things, that things need to, that kind of thing should be pointed out. Like I think that literature is a very, 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 important art form. I'll avoid using the word sacred because I don't think it means anything anymore. But for me, books, writing is the number one thing. And when I see, all these pretenders and posers and stuff, and particularly when I see, people, who when I see second-rate critics advancing second-rate work so that when their own novel comes out later on, it can appear to be first-rate because they have lowered the bar or something like that, it just makes me want to, shit in my pants and then, throw it at people.
Do you think that there are people in the business who are that calculated about their feedback?
I think they are either that calculated or they are stupid and or talentless enough that they just don't know it.
That's fair. Both ways, both ways.
When a mediocre mind reads a mediocre book, it will think it's great. Sometimes you can have a first-rate mind that happens to be attached to a mediocre talent that might think, it's like here's this book where no sentence is longer than 8 words long, and every single comment is a kind of reductio ad absurdum. I'm going to write just like Roxane Gay. There's a Faulkner's not an intellectual.
Right.
Neither Hemingway was an intellectual. There are certain kinds of Wallace Stevens is a great intellectual and a great writer. T.S. Eliot. Norman Mailer I think is like super smart but not an intellectual, right? I mean it's just incidental. Writing, a book, or a short story, a work of prose, succeeds on its own terms, not according to a list of terms. One of which is always be smart. Be smart. In a sort of Einsteinian theory of relativity kind of way. Richard Powers is a very smart guy. He is much smarter than me. I find his books dull as dishwater. The heart's in the right place. I want to like them. I have never been able to read one without falling asleep. David Foster Wallace, was a very smart guy who was a much more naturally talented writer than Richard Powers. I don't like his books mostly for different reasons, but I think that like he has a genuine sort of storytelling ease
this is
there.
The Kenyans and the Wallace
Yeah.
estate. And the Powers, the B.
No, here, you want to hear literary, like 3 different publications, contacted me after David Foster Wallace died to write a takedown of him. And I'm like, how crass are you? It's like the man just killed himself and you want me to write a thing saying, well, it's okay because he was a terrible writer. I mean, these are the pieces.
Number on Infinite Jest.
Well, I wrote a bad review of Infinite Jest, a long time before. That doesn't mean I'm going to spit on the man's grave, but 3 different editors, solicited that. And
you're still doing
I don't remember. Not a lot of it. I don't think. But that's what I mean. This sort of like pretended gentility and hypocrisy of this industry. It's like what you're asking me for. I know what you're asking me for. You should go fuck yourself. And no, I won't write it. And how do writers become powerful by not giving a shit? About things like that. When 1 million people call me up to apologize, I'm like, why should I apologize? Do you think I want to kill Jewish people? If you do, then you should have me, locked up and incarcerated. If not, then call my joke in poor taste, if that's what you want to call it. But like, let us not pretend that I am advocating violence against Jews or somehow, desensitizing people to the horrors of the Holocaust, which is precisely what the line is actually, declaiming. It's realized that like. One of the reasons why I write sentences like that is to remind people, that writers can still fucking shock you. And, despite the fact that we've been superseded by, 8 million different sorts of, technological art forms and stuff like that, at the root, it's words behind almost every one of them, unless you're a painter or a dancer. And even those are often mediated through language anyway. It's the words that are powerful and you have to stick, true to them. And, look, I know how to offend people, and sometimes I think it's really important to offend people, just to remind people, that there are standards and values that are important to them. And the reason why people get upset about them is because, in fact, they're being contravened, all the time. And most of our effort, is directed towards shoring up, these shoddy edifices. Publishing, is one of the worst run industries in the world at this point. Its economics make absolutely no sense. And when all of these kind of rapacious media companies bought them up and pointed that out and basically destroyed them, their response to that was to sort of like try to change writing. Publishers, editors' responses was try to change writing, to conform to this model, then to realize, art and commerce are two separate things. You can say the same thing about the art world. You can say the same thing about the movie world and all that. Chances are, if it made a lot of money, it's not very good. It might be pleasurable, it might be entertaining, and all that, but it is not going to be speaking any truth to power, to use a phrase that's around these days, and it's not going to be kind of plumbing depths of the soul or of history or of the contemporary world that people are afraid to talk about. It's going to deliver messages that trade on very familiar idioms that people think they can sell.
The opposition of art and commerce, I understand, but I don't understand. It's different now in that. I don't think do you mean that popular and deep can never be the same thing?
I think that they can only incidentally be the same thing. I don't think that you can set out to write a book that's hugely, like set out to write a book, to be extremely commercial, and that also is distinct, original, and unsettling.
Set out to, because there's an element of motive there. But the question of whether. So here's a strange thing that we've discovered with this business, okay?
Mm-hmm.
And now we're doing mostly branded content that is not sales videos that are creative and deep, and I don't want to get too excited here, but you know what I mean. There's a weird phenomenon online with the way that videos are reacted to and prioritized, which is that the shareability of some piece of content, I hate the word content, some piece of content, whatever, is rises in proportion to its ability to say something that somebody connects with, some resonating fact. Mm-hmm. So that resonance, it's not a total stand-in for depth, but it's close.
Yeah, but
you've got to plumb a little bit beyond what you're seeing on your memes and your thinking. You've got to find some level, and it's not all that unlike an insight that might appear in the middle of a paragraph of a Chabon novel or a Latham novel or whatever. I don't know if you two guys are not fond of fun.
I know. I like Chabon.
An insight that is somewhat literary in nature, that has been extracted and turned into, let's say, a short video. And that's a bummer in a lot of ways. And I would rather be in the Riviera making money off my short stories, but that's not happening, anymore. So the question is, can art and commerce dance together enough that a lot of other people who would otherwise be in cubicles have a new career?
No.
Okay. Expound. You've got to disprove the premises that I laid out.
You can be clever. You can be smart. You can give the people what they want. But I think resonance usually trades on familiarity rather than originality. And most of what people call originality is usually recontextualizing well-known truths in new packages, and that is to some degree part of the mission of art. There's a reason why we don't just keep reading Romeo and Juliet over and over again. Jilted or blocked love exists in different forms in different societies and different times and all that. So you have to keep updating the story. But for me, I think that art is a unique kind of cultural production. Most cultural production is geared towards keeping the species alive, which means that it's geared towards homogenization and suppressing difference, and just kind of like just kind of generally, like agglutination of people and ideas and stuff, towards a single path, because humans are fundamentally a herd animal. Like we survive in big, clumps, knowing that people will be picked off on the edges, but that the mass of people will survive. And that's what most cultural production is sort of geared towards. To me, what I call art, the only thing that deserves the name of art is cultural expression that seeks to expose that process. And you can't expose that process if you're also playing to it. Now, we live in a capitalist world, and so that doesn't mean that capitalism cannot through the sort of random forces of the marketplace seize on this and make it a success. But in doing so, it will almost always try to water down the prospects.
You started out though by saying that you absolutely cannot disregard the reader, that you cannot disregard the market, that you have to make your stuff packageable enough, your art packageable enough.
No, you have to pay attention to them. You have to think about what they want, but you don't think about what you want to say. Think about things that people are thinking about right now, and conceive of a way to bring those together. I think for me, what's so disempowering, when I see young writers, whether it's in classes or books that are sent to me and all that, who want to sound like everyone else because they want to feel like they're part of a club, and I want to write them back, and I'm like, you are not part of the club because no one is part of the club. The club does not exist. The club is capital and political power, and those are anomalous, and it doesn't actually care about its members. Its members are interchangeable and replaceable. Like you are unique. And it is your unique point of view that is the only thing, that makes you of value in this world, So like celebrate your uniqueness. And like I said, it's not a question of, like saying things that other people want to hear. It's saying things in a way that other people can hear them, But what they want to hear is your truth. It's like when I forget, were you in a lit seminar or just workshop in class?
Both.
In lit seminar, I was like always trying to get people to write, papers, like about their opinion of a novel, and what they would always tell me is what the novel was about, as though it were about this thing to everyone. It's like no one cares, about that. What people care about is an individual take on this same material.
Mm-hmm. All right, last one. Literature isn't weak; it's strong. It isn't given, it takes. It isn't protected, it protects. And finally, literature cannot be saved because literature saves us. When it no longer saves us, it is no longer literature. Perhaps it once was and has lost its relevance. Perhaps it never was. The distinction is one we can and should argue about, and if we don't reach a conclusion, that's a good sign. Because a book about which everyone in the culture says the same thing has lost its ability to say anything about the culture. Just as a literary classic, to borrow a phrase from the beleaguered Mark Twain, is a book that everybody talks about, but which no one has read.
The only thing that's going to save us is an imagined narrative, that's powerful enough that people can believe in it. And to me, that's a form of literature. I don't know what it will come through. It could be a story that a lot of people tell each other on social media. It could be a movie. It could be a book. I think it's going to be collective. I think it has to be collective. It could be a story that a certain kind of scientist manages to put together. Somebody has to come up with that, like a kind of guns, germs, and steel narrative. Times 1,000. That enables people to understand. The narratives that are most, just like one more thing, the narratives I think that are most, like compelling to us right now are in fact the narratives of destruction. That is what we're deeply into. We're not doing this by accident. People really want to destroy the world and see what happens next. Maybe they want to do it, because they know that the world that we live in is shit. Maybe they want to do it because Freud was right and the goal of life is death, and that's what we're all aiming for. Or maybe they just want to do it in this kind of like single nihilistic, if I can't have it, no one can, sort of thing. But that's what attracts us. It's a destruction. Building things is not attractive to us. Having things is attractive to us, but not building things. Someone has to come up with that narrative. That narrative to me will be an artistic and enterprise. Whether it will come out of a book or a story, I don't know, but it will be it will be the product of someone, maybe many someone's heads. Let's sort of take the individual out of it. I do think that it's going to be somewhat collective, but there will be, if we are to live, then there will be perhaps half a dozen kind of galvanic works that drive the imagination towards a vision of saving ourselves rather than abetting our own destruction. How's that?